What is the price of ambition when your heart is the currency? And your family the collateral? In a world where success demands more than just talent, how far would you go to rise above the rest? This is the story of a woman who made a single choice, and watched everything unravel. Rachel was 32, a talented marketing strategist working at one of the fastest growing tech companies in the city. Her resume was clean, her mind sharp, and her social skills honed by years of corporate etiquette. At home, she was a wife to Daniel, a 35-year-old civil engineer known for his calm demeanor and unwavering patience. Together, they raised Lily, their precocious 6-year-old daughter, whose laugh still filled every crevice of their modest but warm suburban home. In public, Rachel and Daniel were the kind of couple others admired, polite, supportive, with a visible tenderness between them. But beneath the facade, subtle fissures had begun to form. Rachel's work environment was not merely challenging, it was gladiatorial. Promotions were like lottery tickets, the odds were cruel unless you played dirty. Or so the whispers claimed. And in that cutthroat culture, lines blurred until even the decent began to redefine what was acceptable. At a weekend corporate retreat held in a high-end resort, someone made a joke, wine-glazed and half-serious. A male colleague leaned over and whispered with a smirk, "If you really want that promotion, sleep with the boss." Everyone laughed. Rachel didn't. She smiled, tight-lipped, eyes slightly distant, not dismissive, not affirming, just quiet. The boss, Greg Harmon, a silver-haired executive with predatory charm, had been circling her for months. Nothing overt, just enough to be deniable. He complimented her pitch decks with more warmth than necessary. He scheduled one-on-one lunches when emails would have sufficed. He lingered too long during handshakes. Rachel wasn't naive. She saw the dance. She knew the rhythm. She had just never decided whether to follow the beat, until now. Something in her cracked that weekend. Maybe it was the stress. Maybe the loneliness. Maybe the quiet resentment that Daniel got to come home at 6 p.m. while she slogged through office politics until midnight. She didn't plan it, but when Greg invited her for a drink in his suite to talk about her future, Rachel said yes. She entered that hotel room as one woman, and left it as another. The act itself was mechanical, almost surreal. She felt like she was watching herself from above, a shadow playing out someone else's ambition. Greg, slick and transactional, didn't say anything afterward beyond a few lines about big things ahead. Rachel showered in the hotel bathroom before returning home. She stood under the water until her fingers pruned, scrubbing herself until her skin felt raw. The promotion came 2 weeks later. A department lead role, corner office, 5-figure raise. Congratulations flooded her inbox. At home, Daniel popped champagne. Rachel smiled, kissed his cheek, and excused herself to the bathroom, where she stared at her own reflection and didn't recognize the eyes staring back. Her relationship with Daniel began to shift. She became elusive. Late meetings, out-of-town conferences, sudden phone calls she had to take in another room. Daniel, ever the gentle husband, didn't press at first. He trusted her, or wanted to. But Lily noticed first. "Mommy's always tired now," she said one night to her dad, her voice small, confused. Rachel began avoiding his touch. She flinched at tenderness. Her guilt had grown roots, wrapping around her chest, choking her from the inside. Still, she justified it. It was just once. It was for the future. For all of them. And then the video arrived. A colleague, no one knows who, had installed a hidden camera in the hallway near Greg's suite. Perhaps for leverage, perhaps for revenge. The footage wasn't graphic, but it didn't need to be. The time stamp, the gestures, the way Greg pressed his hand to the small of Rachel's back as they entered together, it said enough. The file came to Daniel's phone late one night, sent from an anonymous number. No message, just the video. He watched it in silence, 3 times, then set the phone down like it had burned him. In the quiet house, with Lily fast asleep and the refrigerator humming in the distance, Daniel sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the wall, The image of his wife disappearing into another man's room played again and again in his head. Grainy but clear. He didn't wake her. He didn't confront her. Not yet. The betrayal hadn't fully registered. It wasn't just infidelity. It was the realization that she had gambled everything. And the worst part, she hadn't even told him the rules of the game. Outside, the street was silent, but inside their home, a storm had already begun. Daniel watched the footage again in the solitude of his car. The screen's cold glow painting flickers of blue across his face. He sat in the darkened garage. The hum of the engine silenced, as if the entire world had paused to let him grieve in private. The image looped. Rachel, his wife. The mother of his child. The woman who once traced hearts on his palm in the quiet of dawn, smiling softly. Brushing her hair behind one ear. Standing far too close to Greg Harmon. Then the moment he would never unsee, her stepping into the hotel room beside him. The timestamp was unforgiving. It marked betrayal with surgical precision. It was the same weekend she'd kissed him goodbye and said, "Chicago." But what cut deeper than the deception was the effortless grace with which she'd done it. No guilt in her eyes. No hesitation. Just Rachel, performing in a play Daniel never auditioned for. His chest tightened, not with rage, but with the slow implosion of dignity. This wasn't just infidelity, it was annihilation. A dismantling of truth. Daniel didn't scream. He didn't throw the phone across the dashboard or punch the steering wheel. He did what rational men do when emotion becomes unbearable. He suppressed it. He saved the video to a private drive, encrypted it, and titled it, without irony, Truth. Then he drove, not home, not to a bar, but to Martin. Martin, Rachel's father, lived with the rigidity of a man carved from war. A retired colonel. He saw the world in binaries, right and wrong, honor and disgrace. He had never fully trusted Daniel, considered him too soft-spoken, too kind. But as he watched the footage on the small screen, his hardened features didn't flinch. Only the slight quiver of his left jaw muscle betrayed the storm brewing beneath. When the video ended, silence engulfed the room like a shroud. Martin finally stood, crossed his arms behind his back, and stared out the window into the dark. "I want the family at the estate this weekend," he said. Everyone, including her. The estate was an echo of legacy, an old colonial house where walls remembered generations. It had seen marriages, funerals, and christenings. But this time, it was summoned for a tribunal. Rachel was told to pack light and come alone. No explanations, no discussion. When she walked through the heavy oak doors, she no longer moved like the sharp, confident woman who once led marketing presentations with poise. She looked like someone who had forgotten her place in the world. In the grand dining hall, under a portrait of her grandfather, Rachel stood trial. The family formed a half-moon around her, each face a mirror of betrayal. Her father, seated like a judge, didn't raise his voice. He didn't have to. This wasn't just betrayal, he said, it was desecration. Her phone was confiscated, internet cut, no letters, no appeals. Rachel became a prisoner of legacy, shackled not by bars, but by shame. Her mother sat near the window, crying silently into a handkerchief. Her brother refused to look at her. The air was thick with unspoken questions. Back in the city, Daniel filed for divorce, but he asked for nothing. Not the house, not the car, not the joint accounts. He made one request only: to hold full authority over naming their unborn child. A child who now existed in a moral limbo. Was it his? Could he love it regardless? Did it matter? Martin, his voice steel, endorsed the demand. That child will not carry her disgrace. Not in name, not in blood. Corporate headquarters, upon hearing whispers of the scandal, paused Rachel's promotion indefinitely. Her email access was cut. Her name removed from key project documents. Where once her phone rang daily with meetings and congratulations, now there was only silence. Invitations dried. Allies evaporated. Rachel didn't just lose favor, she ceased to exist in professional memory. In her isolation, Rachel wrote, 4 pages of ink-smeared sorrow. A letter to Daniel, a confession, a plea. She folded it with trembling hands and sent it through a cousin. He received it. He never opened it. He placed it in the bottom drawer of his desk, beneath tax returns and appliance warranties. Some truths were too heavy to read. The days turned to months, and her name faded from headlines and group chats. She became a ghost, whispered about, pitied by some, despised by others. Rachel the strategist became Rachel the shame. A parable passed between mothers and daughters. A warning at office happy hours. She had gambled with what she thought was hers to wager, her body, her choices. But ambition demanded a price no one warned her about. And the cost was everything. What remains of a mother when the world strips her name, her child, and even her mistakes from history? Rachel had once been a central figure in the architecture of her own life, designing her days with purpose and precision. But now, she existed only as a whisper in her family's lineage, a ghost walking the borders of memory. Meanwhile, Daniel had moved forward, or at least, he'd tried. He married Hannah, his childhood friend who had never once demanded more than his presence. She was gentle where Rachel had been driven, quiet where Rachel had been dazzling. Their new home was modest but warm, filled with the gentle laughter of Lily, now 7, and the soft coos of an infant son. Daniel worked long days and returned home to candlelit dinners and soft jazz. Not tension. For a time, it felt like he'd been granted a second life, one he hadn't known he deserved. Rachel, in contrast, remained exiled in the countryside. The home her parents kept was old and sparse, its walls thick with the silence of generational regret. Without internet, without access to the life she'd once ruled, she spent her days cleaning, tending to a small garden, and writing in a journal she hid beneath the floorboards. She wrote not to anyone in particular, but to time itself, pages filled with ink and pain, apologies to Lily, confessions to the child she never got to name, and words for Daniel that she imagined whispering into the wind. But peace is fragile, and fate, it seemed, was not finished exacting its toll. It was a Thursday when Lily disappeared. She had left for school at 7:15 a.m., as she always did. Hannah packed her lunch. Daniel kissed her forehead. She skipped down the driveway, backpack bouncing. She never made it to class. The school called at 8:42 a.m., asking if Lily was homesick. By 9 a.m., Daniel was at the police station. By 11 a.m., helicopters circled the area. There were no tire marks, no witnesses. The security cameras at the school had malfunctioned that morning, a glitch. They said. Panic was too weak a word for what Hannah felt. She clawed at her own arms, sobbing in hallways. Daniel stopped speaking entirely, operating like a machine on auto drive. He didn't sleep, he didn't eat, he sat by the phone and stared. Then, 3 days later, at 2:14 a.m., a message arrived. It came to Daniel's encrypted cloud drive, the same one where he'd once stored the truth about Rachel. An anonymous link, one file, no name. He opened it. The video was short, 47 seconds. Lily sat on a metal chair in what looked like a storage unit, dimly lit. Concrete walls, no windows. Her arms were folded, eyes wide but dry. No panic, just silence. Then a voice, distorted, as if dragged across shards of glass. Feminine, but corrupted by rage. You took my child. A pause, static. Now I take yours. Daniel fell to his knees. He knew that voice. It had sung to Lily on rainy nights, had whispered dreams into his ear, had once asked him to name a daughter. It was Rachel's voice, but not as he remembered it. This voice was hollowed out by time and torment. This was a Rachel who had sat too long in silence, who had counted years by absence and regret. A Rachel who had loved too late. Too wrongly. The police were called. The video was analyzed, traced, but it had been routed through so many VPNs, mirrored through so many shadows. It might as well have come from another world. Daniel stood by the crib of his son, watching the child breathe, trying to convince himself this nightmare would end. But somewhere, out there, A woman undone was rewriting the narrative. She had lost everything, and in her mind, this was justice. Rachel had re-emerged, not as a mother, not as a wife, not even as a woman. She was vengeance with a heartbeat. And Lily was her final bet. What is a mother when stripped of her child? Her name, her future, a question Rachel never stopped asking herself in the dim hollows of the cottage where time had gone to rot. But if she couldn't be remembered as a mother by others, she would become one in her own terms. And in her mind, that meant reclaiming what had been taken, by law, by shame, by Daniel. She didn't want vengeance, she told herself. She wanted balance, and Lily was the scale. Rachel didn't hire a killer. She hired a driver, a silent man with no questions, no conscience, just a van and an address. Her instructions were simple. Collect the girl after school. Drive her to the cabin. Keep her safe. She paid in cash, used a burner phone, erased every trace. The world would call it a kidnapping, but Rachel called it retrieval, rescue, redemption. The cabin was hidden deep in a thicket of long-forgotten woods, surrounded by trees tall enough to block signals and memories alike. Inside, she had plastered the walls with photographs of Lily, her first steps. A Halloween costume, a finger-painted drawing with crooked hearts. She arranged them like altars, like proof. Lily belonged to her, not Daniel, not that woman he married. Her. Lily, at first, didn't cry. Rachel gave her hot cocoa and fuzzy blankets. She read stories at night. Stories she had once whispered to Lily through a cracked bedroom door. But the little girl was not the same toddler Rachel had left behind. She was curious, sharp, alert. "Who are you really?" Lily asked one night, her voice barely more than a breath. Rachel smiled with a sadness that hollowed her cheeks. "I'm the one who should have raised you." Back in the city, Daniel had unraveled. The police had leads, but no conclusions. Cameras had nothing. Witnesses had seen nothing. But Daniel had lived with Rachel, loved her once, and that instinct, the one buried beneath betrayal and grief, whispered one name. He hired a private investigator. The man was ex-FBI, fluent in patterns, in anomalies. They traced the video's metadata, found a radio frequency embedded in the static, a brief flicker of sound that shouldn't have been there. Morse code. It said, "Dad, here, cold." It was Lily. Somehow, she had found a way to hijack the cabin's old emergency radio, tap into a forgotten frequency, and send a pulse of hope. It was enough. By the time the task force surrounded the cabin, the moon had vanished behind clouds, and every breath carried the weight of gunpowder and hesitation. Rachel had barricaded the doors, wrapped herself and Lily in a tangle of blankets soaked with kerosene. One flick, one spark, and everything would be ash. She screamed at the windows. No one would take Lily again. She promised she wouldn't hurt her, only herself, and anyone who tried to interfere. Negotiators whispered. Marksmen steadied their aim. But Daniel stepped forward. No weapons, no armor, only words. He asked to speak with her. They let him. He stood 10 feet from the cabin, a flashlight illuminating his face. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He called her not by name, not by pet names once exchanged in love. He called her, the woman inside. "You are not Rachel anymore," he said. "You are not the person I married, or the person I hated. You are a stranger to all of us, even to Lily. And strangers don't raise our children." There was a silence, the kind that swells, then breaks. Inside, Rachel looked at Lily. The child stared back with the kind of gaze that splits hearts. Not fear, not love, something else, recognition, perhaps, of a wound shared, or a story they no longer believed. Rachel loosened her grip. She let the match fall to the ground. It didn't ignite, just rolled, like a question unanswered. When she stepped out, Lily was in her arms. Her voice didn't crack, her eyes didn't plead. She simply said, "At least she still remembers my face." It wasn't a surrender. It was a funeral for a version of herself that never got to live. What happens to a name when it no longer fits the shape of a life? When the title of Mother becomes something spoken only in court transcripts and psychiatric evaluations. Rachel Davis was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison on charges of kidnapping, identity fraud, and psychological endangerment of a minor. She stood silently as the judge read her sentence, eyes blank, mouth unmoved, but it was not the gavel or the guards that broke her. It was the sound of Lily's voice, testifying from behind a glass panel, calling her, "the woman who used to sing to me." Lily survived, physically, but survival, as the world knows, is never neat. She endured therapy, endless hours in quiet rooms with careful words and soft chairs. She drew pictures of cabins and fire. She asked questions no therapist could answer. The worst of them all, why did my mom become someone else? Daniel raised her with grace. He never changed Lily's last name, but he filed every official document with the mother's name section left blank. Not as punishment, as acknowledgement. There were things he couldn't teach her, wounds he couldn't reach, but he could give her the space to choose what to remember, and what to leave behind. Rachel, behind bars, began writing, not for a publisher, not for the world, for Lily, a memoir of every broken piece, every decision, every lie she told herself to survive the fallout of ambition and shame. She wrote it on smuggled paper, folded each page into her mattress. She never sent them. She knew Lily would not read them, but perhaps one day, they would outlive her. Hannah adopted Lily legally when she turned 10. It was quiet, uneventful, no party, no ceremony, just a notary, a file folder, and a gentle signature, but Hannah left a drawer untouched in the guest room, labeled only with Lily's name. Inside were photos of Rachel, newspaper clippings, the unopened letters. One day, if Lily wished, she could see the woman who once carried her into this world, and carried herself into ruin. Rachel died at 52. Ovarian cancer. The prison warden signed the death certificate. No next of kin claimed the body. A nurse, the one who used to hand her water during chemotherapy, placed a handwritten note in her file. She remembered a song about stars. Sang it every Tuesday. The prison chapel held a 10-minute service. No one came. A chaplain read a psalm. The wind did the rest. Weeks later, a letter arrived at Daniel's home, an invitation to a memorial for Rachel Davis. Lily opened it, read it, and tore it in half. She didn't cry, she didn't speak, she dropped the pieces into the trash and went back to her books. Years passed. At 28, Lily stood before a mirror in her wedding gown, veil cascading like silence down her shoulders. She adjusted a loose strand of hair, took a breath, and looked into the lens of the photographer's camera. "I'm not my mother," she said, softly, "but I learned something from her. You can forgive someone by choosing not to carry them anymore." The flash went off. Somewhere, in a drawer marked by time, Rachel's name faded to nothing, and Lily stepped into a new story, unburdened. Not every name is meant to last. But every daughter deserves a future where it doesn't have to.